Dust came in low from the flats that morning, dragging the scent of old rain and rusted iron. Whisper Creek was a town that had learned to swallow its own sins, but even it held its breath when the wagons rolled in for auction day. The square baked under a white sky, heat warping the air, horses shifting restlessly as men leaned on railings with half interest, half hunger. Women stayed inside, curtains barely drawn. It wasn't a day for mercy. Elias Thorne stood near the post where the preacher was reading names like scripture gone sour. He looked like a man scraped thin by years, shoulders slightly bent, hat-rimmed shadow cutting across eyes that had forgotten how to rest. His boots were cracked, his palms leathered from rope and regret. The ranch he owned out west of the ridgeline was dying, same as him, a place of dry wells and half-starved cattle. Yet he'd come here with the last of his silver, not for company nor charity, but for a pair of hands that might keep the land alive one more season. They brought her out third. Chains rattled lightly against the wooden stage. She wasn't dressed for pity, a rough dress, dirt up to her knees, hair tangled with wind. Still, she stood straight, chin raised as if daring the world to blink first. Someone in the crowd hissed, "That's the one. Too wild for man, too tame for the tribe." The preacher cleared his throat, voice oily as lamp smoke. "Half-blood heathen. Calls herself Rose of the Badlands." Elias felt something shift in the air, not pity, but recognition, like hearing a broken tune you once tried to forget. She scanned the crowd, her gaze landing on every face like judgment. When her eyes met his, it wasn't pleading he saw there. It was defiance, pure and raw, the kind that gets a person killed. In a place like this, the bidding started slow. No one raised a hand. Men chuckled, spat tobacco, murmured about bad blood and curses. The sheriff leaned near the preacher, whispering something that drew laughter. The girl didn't flinch. Elias could have turned away, could have walked back to his horse, back to the emptiness he knew. Instead, he lifted his hand. "1 silver," he said. The laughter stopped. A few heads turned, measuring him. The sheriff squinted. "You sure, Thorne? Word is, she bites." "She works, don't she?" Elias asked. The preacher shrugged. "Depends on the chain." The hammer fell. "Sold." She didn't thank him when the chains came off. Didn't even look at him. She walked past, eyes straight ahead, like someone headed toward her own sentence. He followed her out of town, both silent under the groan of wind. By sundown, the world had changed color. Everything tinted gold and blood red as they rode. The land stretched endless, the kind of quiet that hums in a man's chest when he's got too much memory. Elias kept glancing sideways, trying to figure what manner of person he'd brought home. Her wrists bore scars from rope, and her mouth had that stubborn curve that said she'd seen men die and hadn't cried for them. "You got a name?" he asked finally. She didn't answer, just looked toward the horizon, where storm clouds were stacking like bruises. He tried again. "You can stay in the barn. Don't spook the horses. They don't take kindly to strangers." Still no reply. The only sound was the creak of saddle leather, the slow rhythm of hooves. The silence between them felt sharp enough to cut skin. They reached the ranch as darkness slid down the sky. The place looked worse than he remembered. Half the fence fallen, barn roof sagging, windmill stilled. He dismounted, muscles stiff. She climbed down without help, eyes scanning the place, as if measuring what could be used, what could be escaped. "There's stew inside," he muttered. "Ain't much." She shook her head, heading for the barn instead. Inside, Elias struck a lantern and watched her settle in a corner, rolling up a thin blanket she must have carried hidden beneath her dress. The horses shifted uneasily. She murmured something low, a tune foreign and soft. They calmed. He didn't recognize the words, but the sound was like water finding stone, persistent, inevitable. Outside, thunder grumbled in the distance. Elias leaned on the doorway, lantern light catching the scar on her temple. He wondered who had put it there, militia, raiders, someone calling themselves righteous. He wanted to ask, but the question lodged in his throat. He'd lost the right to demand truth from anyone long ago. She looked up suddenly. "Why'd you buy me?" The question came like a knife thrown quiet and straight. He met her eyes, couldn't lie. because no one else would. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered. Not gratitude, not yet, but something less sharp than anger. She nodded once and turned away. The rain began as they slept. Elias lay awake in the house, listening to it drum against the roof, steady as a heartbeat. The land would drink deep tonight, maybe enough to keep the cattle another month. He thought of the girl out in the barn, thought her eyes in the auction light, unbroken even after everything. He remembered another face, his wife's, framed by firelight years ago, just before the barn went up. He'd carried that smell of smoke ever since. Maybe that's why he'd raised his hand today. Not out of charity, but guilt, as if saving one wild soul might balance what he'd failed to save before. Near dawn, he stepped outside. The storm had passed, leaving the ground slick and shining under moonlight. Through the barn slats, he saw her sitting awake, legs drawn close, watching the rain ease into mist. For a moment, he thought she looked almost at peace. Then she turned her head slightly, sensing him there, and the look she gave him wasn't fear or trust. It was warning. He nodded once and went back inside. The wind carried the smell of wet earth through the open window. He let it in. Something was changing in the air. He could feel it, the kind of shift that comes before either life or ruin. Out here, those two things often wore the same face, and he had just bought himself a storm with eyes. Morning came gray and cold, the kind of light that showed the bones of everything. Elias woke to the sound of a hammer, dull, rhythmic, purposeful. He stepped onto the porch and saw her, hair pulled back, driving nails into a fence post like she'd been born to do it. No words, no glances, just motion. The girl worked as if silence were her armor. Her dress was torn at the hem, her bare feet caked in mud, but she moved with a kind of grace that belonged to the untamed. He didn't interrupt. It had been years since anyone had worked that hard on his land, without complaint. The cattle stirred in the distance, their ribs sharp beneath hide. The storm had fed the soil, but not enough. He needed another week of rain, maybe two, and some miracle of labor to save what little remained of his herd. When she paused, Elias brought her a canteen. "Water," he said simply. She took it without thanks, drank, and wiped her mouth with the back of her wrist. "You fixed the east fence too?" she asked, voice rough but steady. "Tomorrow. It's rotted worse than the rest." She nodded. "I'll do it." He almost smiled. "You'll do it or you'll help me do it?" A faint smirk, quick as a breath. "We'll see." For a long while, that was how they lived. Word by word, fence by fence, two souls stitched together by necessity. She didn't talk about the past, and he didn't ask. The land didn't allow for much talking anyway. It wanted sweat, not confession. Still, Elias couldn't help noticing the small things. The way she fed the weakest calf first. The way she traced lines in the dirt with her toe, as if drawing maps of some place she missed. Sometimes, when she thought no one was near, she hummed low melodies in a language he didn't know. The sound traveled to the fields like something older than sorrow. One afternoon, he found her near the corral, holding a small wooden carving. A bird, rough but delicate. "Made that?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "My father taught me. Said if a spirit's restless, you carve a home." He turned the carving over in his hand, tracing the wings. "You got a lot of restless spirits?" Her gaze flicked to the horizon. "Enough to keep me busy." That night, he dreamed of his burned barn again, the one that took his wife and boy. In the dream, smoke turned to wings, hundreds of them, beating against a sky that wouldn't give rain. He woke before dawn, sweating, heart pounding like a hammer. From outside came that humming again, low, steady, alive. He stepped to the window and saw her feeding a small coyote pup, its ribs showing through matted fur. She poured milk into a tin bowl and waited while it lapped weakly. Elias stepped outside. "You know that thing will bite when it's strong enough." "Then it'll be ready to live," she said, eyes never leaving the animal. He rubbed his jaw. "We don't have food to spare. You'd rather see something die easy?" The question stopped him. It wasn't insolence. It was a mirror held up to everything he'd become. He turned away, muttering, "Do what you want." By midday, he found himself fixing the roof beside her. Neither spoke much. When their hands brushed reaching for a plank, she didn't pull away, and for the first time, he saw that her wildness wasn't madness. It was survival, a fire that refused to go out, even when starved. Days passed. Whispers grew in town. The storekeeper's boy rode by once, slowing just long enough to shout, "Hey, Thorn, you taming your savage yet?" The laughter that followed carried farther than it should have. Elias clenched his fist but didn't respond. The girl's eyes hardened, though she said nothing. That evening, as the sky bled out in shades of copper, she asked, "Why don't you fight them?" He was stacking hay bales when she spoke. "Because I've fought enough and lost enough." She considered that, then said quietly, "Sometimes not fighting is another kind of losing." The word stuck to him through supper and long after. When rain finally came again, it came violent. Wind tearing through rafters, water hammering the earth. Elias ran outside to tie the horses while she hauled buckets, her hair plastered to her face. Lightning cracked so close it made the ground shudder. As they slammed the barn doors shut, she turned to him, eyes wide and alive. "This land likes to test you," he said, breathless. "So do people," she shot back. They laughed then, a raw, unguarded sound that startled them both. For a moment, the storm seemed far away. Afterward, they sat by the fire inside, drying their clothes in silence. The light flickered across her face, softening the hard lines of it. He wanted to ask her what she ran from, but the question felt like trespassing. Instead, he said, "You're good with the land. Most folks wouldn't last a week out here." "I don't scare easy," she said. He nodded. "I can see that." A pause. The wind rattled the window. "You still think I'm wild?" she asked suddenly. He met her eyes. "No, I think you're honest." For a long breath, neither spoke. Then she looked away, whispering, "That's rarer than kindness." Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper. The fire sank low. Elias poured 2 cups of coffee, the bitter scent mixing with wet earth. They drank in silence until sleep crept close. When he woke before dawn, she was already outside, standing at the fence line, watching the gray horizon. A sliver of light bled through the clouds, turning her silhouette gold. For the first time since the auction, he felt a strange ache of hope. But as he approached, he noticed something half buried at her feet. A brand burned faintly into her shoulder, visible where her dress slipped. A symbol he'd seen before on the bodies left after militia raids. He froze. She turned, catching his stare, and in her eyes he saw the truth he hadn't wanted. She wasn't just a girl the town had wronged. She was someone hunted. Neither spoke. The wind carried the faint sound of church bells from town, hollow and far away. She pulled her shawl over Mark, her voice low. "You can tell them if you want." Elias shook his head. "Ain't my place." "Then what is your place, Elias Thorne?" He didn't answer. He just looked out toward the plains, where storm clouds were building again, darker this time, heavy as judgment. Something told him that when they broke, the rain wouldn't be the only thing coming for them. By late summer, the air thickened with dust and tension. The grass around Whisper Creek had turned the color of bone, and each sunrise felt like it might be the last before the land gave up altogether. Elias had grown used to the rhythm of her presence, the scrape of her boots, the low hum in the mornings, but lately even the air between them carried weight. She'd grown quieter, sharper-eyed, as if listening for something he couldn't hear. It was near sundown when riders appeared at the edge of property. 5 of them, dust ghosts cut from the horizon. Elias knew their shapes before he saw their faces. The sheriff's broad hat, the gleam of his badge, the arrogance that came from carrying both law and grudge. They dismounted slow, boots hitting dry soil with practiced menace. Sheriff Cade called out, "Evening, Thorne. Mind if we have a word?" Elias wiped his hands on a rag, standing straight. "What brings you out here?" Cade smiled like a man smelling blood. "Word from the canyon says Comanche raiders took a herd last week. Left tracks leading north. Found some curious things along the trail. Half prints, half hooves. You wouldn't happen to know anyone who walks between worlds, would you?" The girl, Wren now, though she hadn't spoken that name again, stepped out from the barn doorway. She moved like someone ready to run or fight, whichever came first. The sheriff's men shifted, hands near their belts. Elias said carefully, "She's been here for months." "You know that." Cade's eyes glinted. "You vouching for her?" "That's a heavy promise for a man already under debt." "She works my land." "That's all." "Then you won't mind if we ask her a few questions." Elias stepped forward. "You've had your fun. Now ride back." Cade's smile thinned. "I'm the law here, Thorn. You forget that." Wren's hand slid toward the knife at her belt. Elias caught her wrist just enough for her to feel the warning in his grip. Cade's gaze followed the movement, slow and knowing. "Careful," the sheriff said. "Wouldn't want anyone thinking you were harboring an outlaw." When they finally rode off, the dust they left behind clung to the air like a curse. Wren pulled free from Elias's hand and stalked toward the corral. "You shouldn't have touched me," she said, voice low but burning. "I was trying to keep you alive. I don't need your mercy." He sighed. "You need your head clear. Cade's not the type to leave something alone once it gets under his skin." She turned to face him. "Then maybe it's time he learned who he's hunting." "That night," she told him. "Not all at once, but in pieces that fit like shards of glass. The militia had raided her mother's camp when she was 10, took survivors to a trader's post where the worst kind of commerce happened. She escaped years later, stole horses to buy passage south, only to be caught and branded as a thief. Every mark on her skin was a record of survival. You can call it wild," she said, "but wild keeps breathing when tame gets buried." Elias sat silent long after she finished. He had no comfort to give, just the truth of knowing what guilt felt like when it never left. The next day brought smoke. He saw it first over the ridge, black thread twisting into the sky. Then came the riders again, faster this time, angrier, Kay at the front shouting orders. They claimed they'd tracked stolen horses to his property. Elias denied it, but they'd already made up their minds. One man kicked the barn door open. Another struck a lantern against the beam. Fire bloomed fast, hungry as vengeance. "Don't!" Elias roared, charging forward. A rifle but caught him across the jaw. He hit the ground hard, tasting iron. Through the smoke, Wren appeared like something born aflame, knife in hand, eyes bright with fury. She slashed at the nearest man, catching his arm. He shouted, stumbling back. Cade drew his gun, aiming straight for her. Elias rose, staggering, and reached for the rifle leaning against the fence. The weight of it felt heavier than it should. He leveled it at Cade, breath shallow. "Drop it," Cade said, his tone almost calm. "You point that thing at me, you'll swing for it." Elias's finger tightened on the trigger. He thought of his wife's hands, the fire, the years spent doing nothing while everything he cared for burned. He thought of the girl standing barefoot in the auction dust, unbroken. "She's not yours to burn," Elias said. The shot cracked the air. Cade fell first, the gun slipping from his hand. Then the world erupted. The sheriff's men returned fire, the sound swallowing everything. Elias felt a bullet graze his shoulder, heat and pain mingling until he couldn't tell one from the other. Wren fought beside him, moving with the desperate rhythm of someone who refused to die caged. The barn blazed higher, the horses screaming inside. Together they cut the ropes, drove the animals out through the smoke. When the gunfire finally ceased, the silence was worse than the noise. Two of Cade's men lay still. The others had fled into the dark. Elias leaned against a fence post, bleeding, half blind from the smoke. Wren stood beside him, face streaked with soot, eyes reflecting firelight. He wanted to speak, but no words came. The flames had taken half the barn already. She looked at it and said softly, "It's not the first home I've lost." He tried to laugh, but it came out a cough. "You got a talent for surviving, you know that?" "I had to." Elias glanced toward the sheriff's body. "They'll come for us now. Whole town, maybe more. Then we'll meet them." Her voice carried no fear, only resolve. She picked up a fallen revolver and spun the chamber once before tucking it into her belt. The light caught the scar on her temple, making it glow faintly. Elias pushed himself upright. "You don't have to stay. There's trails, Wes, places they won't find you." "I'm done running," she said. "You should be too." The fire began to die down, leaving embers that pulsed like heartbeats in the dirt. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, promising rain or ruin, maybe both. Elias looked at her and saw not the girl from the auction, but something larger, a force shaped by everything cruel in this land, yet somehow still willing to stand against it. He nodded once, slow, then we'll face it together. She met his gaze, unreadable, then offered a faint, weary smile. Together, then. The night pressed close, smoke curling skyward, carrying with it the last of the old life. What remained was ash, and the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. The horizon flickered with distant lightning, and for the first time in years, Elias felt the pull of the storm not as threat, but as promise. The morning after the fire came hollow and still, as if the land itself were catching its breath. Smoke hung low over the ranch, turning the world gray. Elias woke with his arm bandaged, his ribs aching, and his mind heavy with what they'd done. The sheriff's body lay somewhere in that smoldering ruin, buried by the same wind that now swept across the plains. There would be consequences. Out here, there always were. Wren was already awake, standing near the fence line, her back to him. Her dress was torn, hair wild from the night's chaos, but she stood like she belonged to the earth itself. Elias walked toward her, boots sinking into the damp soil. "You should rest," he said. She didn't turn. "There's work to do." "Work." His voice cracked. "Half the ranch is gone. We're lucky to still be breathing. That's why we rebuild." Her calm unsettled him. He wanted to argue, to tell her the town would be coming for blood, that survival wasn't something you earned through alone. But her eyes, when she finally faced him, made him swallow the words. There was something unbreakable there, the same fire that had carried her through chains, branding irons, and the night before. They worked until their hands bled. By noon, the sky began to clear, sunlight spilling over blackened wood and broken rails. A few cattle wandered near the creek, drawn by the smell of wet grass. Elias felt the sting of each breath, but there was purpose in the ache. For the first time in years, pain meant something more than loss. By late afternoon, the sound of hooves broke the quiet. 3 riders, cautious and slow. Elias gripped his rifle, but Wren lifted a hand. "Wait!" The riders stopped a few paces from the fence. Town men, one he recognized as a preacher, another the general store's keeper, the third too young to carry the kind of fear in his eyes that he did now. They didn't draw their guns. Not yet. The preacher spoke first. "We heard about Cade," he said, voice trembling under his practiced authority. "Whole town's in uproar. Folks are saying you killed him in cold blood." Elias met his stare. He came here with fire and rifles. He made his choice. The preacher shifted, eyes flicking to Wren. "And the girl? Folks think she bewitched you. Said you let her lead you to sin." Wren's expression didn't change, though Elias saw her hand twitch toward the revolver at her hip. He stepped forward, his voice steady. "You tell your people the truth, that the sheriff burned what wasn't his to touch, that she saved what life's left on this land." The storekeeper spat. "You expect them to believe that? She's the reason for all this trouble." Elias leveled the rifle just enough to remind them he wasn't the same man they used to pity. Then maybe they should come see for themselves. The wild girl they're afraid of. The one who did more for this ranch in a month than they've done for their souls in a lifetime. A long silence followed, broken only by the wind brushing through the dry grass. The preacher's face softened, doubt creeping through his certainty. "Elias, there'll be talk. There'll be men who won't let this lie. Then they can ride out here and find out what kind of lies hold up to truth." The preacher looked at Wren once more, something shifting in his eyes. A question, maybe even a flicker of shame, before he turned his horse. The others followed. Their shapes grew smaller against the horizon until the dust swallowed them whole. Elias lowered the rifle, his hands trembling from the weight of it. Wren stood beside him in silence. The world around him felt fragile, rebuilt on smoke and defiance. "You just made enemies," she said quietly. He exhaled. "I've had worse." That evening, as the sun bled orange across the plains, they sat on the porch steps, neither speaking for a long time. The land stretched endless and strange, scarred but alive. Elias looked at the charred barn, at the fence post they'd half-mended, and felt something almost like peace. "Why'd you stay?" he asked finally. "You could have gone anywhere." Wren studied the horizon, where the light softened into dusk. "Everywhere I've gone, I've been someone else's burden, someone's mistake. Here, you let me be something different." He looked down, voice rough. "Didn't know I had that in me." "You did," she said, and her tone carried no kindness, only truth. The night settled thick and cool. Somewhere beyond the creek, a coyote howled, and she smiled faintly. "He lived," she murmured. Elias chuckled under his breath. "Guess even wild things find a way." When dawn came again, the townsfolk arrived, not with guns drawn, but with hands uncertain. Women brought bread. A few boys carried water buckets. No one spoke of Cade. They only looked at Wren, half curious, half reverent, and whispered stories already taking shape. By the week's end, the rumors had changed. Some said she was a spirit sent by the plains to punish cruelty. Others said she was an outlaw who found her soul in the ashes. But those who worked beside her knew the truth. She was neither ghost nor sinner. Only a woman who refused to be broken by what broke others. Months later, the ranch stood rebuilt. Grass grew green again near the creek, and Elias learned to laugh without flinching. Sometimes travelers stopped by, asking if this was a place where the wild girl turned a dying ranch into a refuge. He'd nod, and if they asked her name, he'd only say, "They call her the Widow's Guard." She never corrected him. On quiet nights, she'd sit by the fence with a new carving in her hand, a wren bird, small and rough. Elias would watch from the doorway, the glow of lantern light soft against her face. "You still carving homes for restless spirits?" he'd ask. "Only for the ones that finally found their place," she'd answer. The wind would pick up then, carrying the scent of rain, and the prairie would hum with its endless rhythm. He'd stand beside her, shoulder to shoulder, two silhouettes framed against the wide forever the west. When thunder rolled distant, she'd glance at him, a half-smile ghosting across her lips. "Storm's coming back." He'd nod, eyes on the horizon. "Let it. We've weathered worse." The land around them stretched vast and quiet, holding its secrets. And somewhere deep in that silence, the world seemed to whisper her name, not the one given in cruelty, but the one earned in fire. Some still called her wild. But those who saw her, those who worked the land she saved, spoke softer, with something close to reverence. They called her hope.